There is a question so deep, so radical, that most scientists refuse to ask it, not because it's stupid, but because it's almost too large for the human mind to hold. It is not, what is the universe made of? It is not, how did the universe begin? It is something far more fundamental, far more unsettling. The question is this: why does anything exist at all? Why is there something rather than nothing? Why is there a universe with its galaxies, its atoms, its laws of physics, its light and heat and time, rather than a pure, absolute eternal void? This is the ultimate mystery. And tonight we are going to walk straight into it. My name is not important. What is important is that you lean in, because what you are about to understand will permanently alter the way you see reality. We begin not with a telescope, not with a particle accelerator, but with something much simpler, with the concept of nothing. When you think of nothing, you probably imagine empty space, a black void, a vacuum. But physicists will tell you that empty space is not nothing. Empty space is something. It has geometry. It has quantum fields threaded through it, vibrating at every point. It has energy, what we call vacuum energy, or point energy. Even a perfect vacuum, stripped of every particle, every photon, every atom, is still seething with quantum activity. The vacuum is alive with potential. So when we ask, why is there something rather than nothing, we have to be very precise about what we mean by nothing. True nothing, absolute nothing, would have no space, no time, no laws, no dimensions, no quantum fields, no potential, no possibility. And here is where Leonard Susskind and the physicists who think the deepest thoughts begin to say something extraordinary. True nothing may be unstable. True nothing may be impossible. True nothing, by its very nature, may be forced to become something. Let that sit with you for a moment. The idea is not that a God reached into the void and created the universe. The idea is stranger and somehow more profound than that. The idea is that nothingness itself contains within it the seeds of its own destruction, that a state of pure, absolute emptiness is mathematically and physically forbidden, and that the universe did not so much appear out of nothing as it was expelled from nothing, the way a bubble is expelled from a supersaturated solution. But to understand how that works, we need to understand the laws of quantum mechanics, and we need to understand what those laws say about reality at its most fundamental level. The first thing quantum mechanics tells us is that nothing is ever perfectly still. This is the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, and it is not a limitation of our measuring instruments. It is a deep fact about nature itself. A particle cannot have both a precise position and a precise momentum at the same time. More relevant to us tonight, a field cannot have both a precise value and a precise rate of change at the same time. What this means is that even in the lowest possible energy state, what we would call the vacuum quantum fields cannot be zero. They cannot be perfectly flat and perfectly still. They must fluctuate. They must ripple. They must pop with what we call virtual particles, pairs of particles and antiparticles that appear from nothing, exist for a vanishingly brief moment, and then annihilate back into nothing, like tiny bubbles forming and collapsing in the fabric of space-time. These are not metaphors. These are real. We can measure them. The Casimir effect, the Lamb shift, the behavior of superconductors, all of these phenomena are direct experimental evidence that the quantum vacuum is not empty. It is fizzing with energy and activity. And now we take the next step, and this is where it gets truly mind-bending. If quantum fluctuations happen constantly in the vacuum of our universe, why could they not have happened before the universe existed? Why could not the universe itself be the result of a quantum fluctuation? A fluctuation not in the quantum fields of our universe, but in something even more fundamental, something Susskind and others have called the landscape. To understand the landscape, we need to understand string theory, or at least its central implication. String theory, the framework in which the fundamental constituents of reality are not point particles but tiny, vibrating one-dimensional strings, predicts the existence of a vast number of possible universes. Not 2 possible universes, not 1,000,000. A number so large it makes the number of atoms in our observable universe look like a rounding error. The current estimate is 10 to the power of 500, a 1 followed by 500 zeros. Each of these possible universes has its own laws of physics, its own value for the speed of light, its own strength of gravity, its own mass for the electron, its own cosmological constant, the mysterious energy of empty space that causes the universe to expand. Most of these universes are sterile. Most of them would collapse immediately, or expand so fast that matter could never form, or have physics so different from ours that the very concept of atoms, molecules, stars, planets, or life would be meaningless. But some of them, a tiny, tiny fraction, have physics compatible with complexity, with chemistry, with stars that burn for billions of years, with planets that can hold liquid water, with life. And we obviously live in one of those. This is what Susskind calls the anthropic principle applied to the landscape. We don't live in a random universe. We live in one of the rare universes whose laws permit observers to exist. The universe appears fine-tuned for life, not because a divine hand adjusted the dials, but because only in a finely tuned universe can anyone be around to notice the tuning. But this still doesn't answer our deepest question. Why does the landscape exist? Why do all these possible universes, or even one of them, actually come into being? Here is where we must talk about eternal inflation, and this is perhaps the most audacious idea in all of modern cosmology. The standard Big Bang model tells us that our universe began in an extremely hot, extremely dense state, and has been expanding and cooling ever since. But before the hot Big Bang, or rather triggering it, there was a phase called inflation, a period of exponentially accelerating expansion driven by a form of energy in the quantum field called the inflaton. During inflation, space expanded faster than the speed of light. A region smaller than a proton expanded in a fraction of a second to a size larger than the observable universe today. And when inflation ended in our region, when the inflaton field decayed and its energy converted into the hot plasma of the Big Bang, inflation did not end everywhere. In other regions, inflation continued. In fact, in most regions, inflation never ends. New regions of space are constantly being created, constantly inflating, and occasionally some of them undergo a phase transition. Inflation ends locally. A pocket universe is born, but the background of inflation continues forever. This is eternal inflation, and if it is correct, our universe is not alone. Our universe is one bubble in a vast, perhaps infinite, perhaps eternal sea of bubbles. Each bubble is a universe. Each universe may have different physics, depending on which of the 10 to the 500 possible string theory vacuum it settles into. Some bubbles have collapsed long ago. Some are still in their infancy. Some may have physics nearly identical to ours, with only tiny, invisible differences. Some may have no atoms, no stars, no possibility of complexity whatsoever. And they are all real. They are all out there. We will never visit them, never communicate with them, never see them, not because of any technological limitation, but because the space between bubbles is expanding faster than light can cross it. We are cosmically isolated, sealed in our pocket of the multiverse forever. Now this is where Susskind's contribution becomes not just physics, but something closer to philosophy, closer to poetry. He looked at this picture, the landscape, the multiverse, eternal inflation, and he said, this is the answer to fine-tuning. This is why our universe's constants look so perfectly calibrated. Not because they were designed, but because there are enough universes with enough variety that some of them will have exactly the right constants for complexity in life. And we are simply the inhabitants of one of the lucky ones. We are not special. We are not chosen. We are the result of an astronomical sampling process, the universe equivalent of rolling the dice enough times that eventually, inevitably, you get the right number. But even this profound picture leaves us standing at the edge of a deeper abyss. Because we can ask, why does eternal inflation happen? Why does the inflaton field exist? Why do the laws of string theory hold? Why is there a landscape at all? Every answer pushes the question back one level, and eventually we are forced to confront what the philosopher Derek Parfit called the existence question in its purest form. Why is there anything at all, including physics, including mathematics, including the very possibility of possibility? Susskind's answer, and it is honest and uncomfortable in equal measure, is this: we don't know, and perhaps we cannot know. There may be a final answer, a theory of everything so complete, so beautiful, so necessary. that it explains not just what the laws of physics are, but why they could not possibly be otherwise. Some physicists like Max Tegmark have proposed that the answer is mathematics itself, that all mathematical structures exist, that reality is mathematics, and that our universe is one mathematical structure among all possible ones. Others, like David Deutsche, argue that explanation can always go deeper, that there is no bedrock, no final answer, no place where the questions stop. But here is what I believe and what I think the physics suggests. The universe is not an accident in the sense of being arbitrary. It is not a fluke. It is the result of deep mathematical necessities operating at a level we can barely glimpse. The quantum vacuum fluctuates because it must. Inflation occurs because the mathematics of quantum fields in curved spacetime demands it. The landscape exists because string theory, if correct, contains within itself a nearly infinite variety of possible configurations, and all of them are in some sense real. We live in this universe with these laws because these laws permit the existence of beings capable of asking why. There is a kind of circularity to this, a deep, strange, almost Buddhist circularity in which the universe exists partly because it can be known, and we exist partly because we are the universe's way of knowing itself. The physicist John Archibald Wheeler, one of the great visionaries of the 20th century, called it the participatory universe, the idea that observation and existence are not separate things, that the act of asking the question is somehow woven into the fabric of the answer. We are not observers standing outside the universe, peering in through a window. We are the universe, turned back on itself, trying to understand its own existence. Let me ask you to hold that thought and to feel the weight of it. You are 13.8 billion years of cosmic evolution condensed into a form complex enough to ask why it exists. The hydrogen in your body was forged in the first 3 minutes after the Big Bang. The carbon in your cells was fused in the hearts of dying stars and scattered across the galaxy in supernova explosions. The calcium in your bones, the iron in your blood, the oxygen in your lungs, all of it was made in the interior of stars that lived and died before our sun was born. You are not in the universe. You are of the universe. You are what the universe looks like when it becomes conscious of itself. And when you ask, why does the universe exist? You are the universe asking about itself. That is not a metaphor. That is physics. That is the most extraordinary fact that physics has ever uncovered. And the mystery does not diminish when you understand it. It deepens. Because the deeper we look, the more we realize that existence is not the default. It is an achievement. It is something that happens against the odds, something that quantum mechanics and inflation and the landscape and the anthropic principle and the long, slow arrow of cosmic evolution conspired to produce, not deliberately, not with intention, but inevitably given enough time, enough space, enough fluctuations in the quantum vacuum of a universe that was never truly nothing. The ultimate mystery is not why the universe exists. The ultimate mystery is that we can ask the question at all, that we can stand here in this thin sliver of cosmic time, on this pale blue dot orbiting an unremarkable star in one of hundreds of billions of galaxies, and reach out with our minds to the very edge of what can be known to the moment before time began, to the structure of the vacuum, to the architecture of the landscape, to the possibility of infinite parallel worlds, and feel, not despair, but awe. That is the gift of physics. That is the gift of science. Not answers, but the courage to keep asking. Good night.